The millionaire expelled her, thinking he would never see her again. But she returned, lifted in the arms of 3 millionaires. The entire ballroom fell silent at the unexpected scene, and the reason behind it would destroy his pride. Chapter 1. Marianne gripped the handle of her suitcase tightly as the taxi climbed the winding road that cut through the Lake District. Through the fogged-up window, she watched the landscape gradually transform, leaving the frantic pace of Kendall behind until she reached a place where the green became denser and the silence more profound. The driver, a grey-haired lady who hadn't stopped talking since they left the bus station, commented on the weather, on the rain that had fallen the night before, on how beautiful this region was but far too isolated for her taste. Marianne just nodded along, pretending to pay attention, but her mind was far away, still trapped in the last few months she had left behind in Manchester. 27 years old and a constant feeling of running away. Not that anyone was actually chasing her, but there was a weight on her chest that had been with her ever since everything had fallen apart. The job at the publishing house that seemed so promising until the day the company shut its doors without warning. The flat she shared with 2 friends that became unsustainable when the bills started piling up. And Ben. Always Ben, with his empty promises and his way of making her feel like she was never enough. When she saw the ad online, looking for someone to work as a housekeeper on a rural estate in the outskirts of the Lake District, Marianne felt it was a sign, a chance to start over, far from everything and everyone. The taxi finally stopped before a wrought-iron gate, imposing and yet worn by time. Behind it, an avenue of ancient trees led the eye to a building that looked like something out of a period drama. The mansion was large, with stone walls covered in ivy and tall windows that reflected the overcast afternoon sky. Marianne paid the fare, thanked the driver, and stood for a moment, observing the place that would be her new reality. There was something in the air that made her hesitate, a strange feeling that she was about to cross an invisible threshold. A middle-aged woman, wearing a navy blue apron, opened the gate and waved for her to enter. Her face was tired, marked by wrinkles that told stories of years dedicated to this place. She introduced herself as Mrs. Gable, the cook and one of the oldest employees of the house. As they walked along the avenue, Mrs. Gable spoke quickly, as if wanting to pass on all the important information before they reached the main entrance. "Mr. Davies is a private man, love. Don't expect much conversation. He spends most of his time in his study, locked away in there. We hardly see him in the common areas. Dr. Richards, who is his doctor, comes here twice a week. Oh, and there's Mr. Wallace too, who takes care of the garden and maintenance. It's just the 4 of us here now. There used to be more staff, but over time they left. This place is too big for so few people, but it is what it is." Marianne absorbed every word, trying to piece together a mental puzzle of this new routine. The house on the inside was even more impressive than from the outside. The entrance hall had a soaring ceiling, with a crystal chandelier hanging like a forgotten jewel. The walls were panelled in dark wood, and old paintings hung in a row, portraits of people Marianne didn't recognize, but who seemed to watch her with serious, distant gazes. Everything there breathed a decadent grandeur, as if the house had once been magnificent, but now lived only on the remnants of that past glory. Mrs. Gable led her down a wide corridor to a room on the 2nd floor. It was spacious, with a double bed, a solid wood wardrobe, and a window that overlooked the back of the property, where a small lake shimmered in the faint afternoon light. Marianne placed her suitcase on the floor and stood before that window, observing the still water and the willow tree growing on the bank, its long, sad branches almost touching the surface. There was something melancholy in that image, as if even nature there was laden with sadness. "Get some rest," Mrs. Gable said before leaving. "Tomorrow morning I'll show you the rest of the house and explain your duties properly. If you need anything, just come down to the kitchen, I'll be there." When she was alone, Marianne sat on the bed and brought a hand to her neck, touching the necklace she never took off. It was a simple pendant, made of willow wood, carved into the shape of a delicate leaf. It had been a gift from her grandmother, Grandma Irene, shortly before she passed. Her grandmother always said that the willow was a tree of healing, of resilience, capable of bending without breaking even in the fiercest storms. Marianne had never much believed in symbolism, but keeping that necklace close made her feel like she carried a piece of her grandmother with her. a memory of a time when she still felt protected. That first night, the silence of the mansion was almost deafening. There was no noise of cars, of neighbors, of anything that resembled the urban life she knew. Only the wind in the trees and every now and then the creak of old wood settling. Marianne had trouble sleeping, tossing and turning, feeling the weight of this unfamiliar place. Sometime in the early hours, she heard footsteps in the corridor, slow, shuffling steps, like someone walking without a clear destination. She lay motionless, holding her breath, until the sound moved away and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, Mrs. Gable knocked on the door early, bringing a tray with coffee, toast with butter, and fruit. She explained that Mr. Davies usually had his coffee alone in the study, that she should tidy the common areas, take care of cleaning the empty rooms, help in the kitchen when needed, and above all respect his privacy. "Don't go into the study unless you're called," she warned with a serious look. "He doesn't like to be disturbed." Marianne spent the first few days exploring the house little by little, discovering rooms that seemed not to have been opened for months. There was a huge library, with shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with dusty books. A music room with a piano covered by a white sheet. Bedrooms that seemed ready to receive guests who never arrived. Everything was clean but devoid of life, as if the entire house were just waiting for something that would never happen. It was only on the third day that Marianne finally saw Mr. Davies. She was passing through the ground floor corridor when the study door opened and he came out, walking towards the kitchen. She froze for a moment, watching him. He was tall, must have been in his early 40s, with dark hair showing grey at the temples, an unshaven beard, and deep-set eyes that carried a profound exhaustion. He wore simple clothes, twill trousers and a crumpled white shirt, and he walked slowly, as if each step required immense effort. When he passed her, he didn't even look in her direction. He just went on his way, disappearing through the kitchen door. Marianne felt a tightness in her chest. There was something about that man that disturbed her, not out of fear but of recognition, as if somehow she saw in him an amplified version of the pain she herself carried. Mrs. Gable was right. Mr. Davies was an absent presence, a ghost inhabiting his own house. The following days confirmed this impression. He rarely appeared. When he did, his head was always down, avoiding eye contact, muttering monosyllabic answers when someone spoke to him. Marianne began to notice patterns. He slept little, if at all. Sometimes in the dead of night, she would hear the footsteps again, always the same, slow and solitary, pacing the corridors like a meaningless ritual. One morning, upon entering the living room to air it out, she found a cup of cold coffee forgotten on the sideboard, next to a book open to a random page. It was as if he had started to read, given up midway, and simply abandoned it all. There. Mr. Wallace, the gardener, was a man of few words but observant. One day, while Marianne was watering the plants on the veranda, he approached and commented in a low voice. "He wasn't like this before. It's been about 3 years since everything changed. I don't know exactly what happened, but it was like someone turned out the light inside him. We who work here try to help as we can, but he doesn't let anyone in." Marianne wanted to ask more, but Mr. Wallace had already returned to his work, cutting the grass with mechanical movements. The curiosity, however, remained ignited. What had happened to Reese? Why did that man live like a recluse in his own home? The following week, the doctor appeared. Dr. Richards was an elegant man in his early 50s, with thin-framed glasses and a leather briefcase always under his arm. He greeted Marianne politely when he first saw her, but went straight to the study for the appointment. Marianne, who was cleaning the nearby hall, couldn't help but overhear part of the conversation that leaked through the ajar door. "Reese, you need to get out of this house for a bit. This place is consuming you. I know it's hard, but being trapped in these thoughts will only make it worse. When was the last time you slept a full night?" Reese's reply was too low for her to hear, but the tone was clearly defensive. Dr. Richards sighed loudly, and Marianne could imagine the look of frustration on his face. "I'm going to increase the dosage of the sedative, but you know that medicine alone won't solve it. We need to work on this in other ways too. Think about what we discussed, please." When the doctor left, he passed by Marianne and paused for a moment, as if he wanted to say something but ended up just nodding and moving on. Marianne was left with the impression that Dr. Richards carried a genuine concern, but also a sense of helplessness in the face of the situation. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Marianne had her first real contact with Reese's fragility. She was tidying the library, stacking books that were out of place, when she heard a noise from the corridor. It was a muffled sound, like someone trying to catch their breath. She dropped everything and ran there. Reese was leaning against the wall, one hand on his chest, his face pale and covered in a cold sweat. His eyes were wide, fixed on some invisible point, and his breath came in short, desperate gasps. Marianne didn't think. She approached slowly, extending her hand. "Mr. Davies, are you all right? Can I help you?" He didn't answer. He seemed trapped within himself, unable to break out of that state. Marianne felt her heart race. She didn't know what to do, but something inside her compelled her to keep talking, keeping her voice calm and steady. "It's okay, I'm here, breathe. Slowly with me, all right? Inhale. Exhale. Slowly." Gradually, miraculously, his breathing began to match the rhythm she dictated. His shoulders relaxed a little, and his lost gaze began to focus on her face. Marianne held his gaze, not looking away, conveying a confidence she didn't know where she was getting from. When he finally managed to breathe more regularly, he slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, exhausted. Marianne sat beside him, respecting his space, but remaining close. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse and broken. "No need to thank me. Do you want me to call Dr. Richards?" He shook his head, still catching his breath. "No, it'll pass. It always does." They sat there for a few minutes in silence. Marianne didn't know what to say, and he seemed to have no strength to talk. When he finally stood up, without looking at her, he returned to the study and closed the door. Marianne was left alone in the corridor, her heart still racing, trying to process what she had just witnessed. That night, she talked to Mrs. Gable about what had happened. The cook shook her head, worried, but didn't seem surprised. "He has these attacks from time to time. The doctor says it's severe anxiety, emotional trauma. We try to keep an eye on him, but he doesn't like to be watched. You did well to help." "But what happened to him, Mrs. Gable? Why is he like this?" The woman hesitated, fiddling distractedly with the dishcloth in her hands. "I don't know if it's my place to tell these things, love, but since you're going to be working here, I think you deserve to know the basics. Mr. Davies was married. His wife Claire left about 3 years ago. It wasn't a normal separation, you see. It was complicated. There was betrayal involved, lies, things that left him devastated. He was never the same after that. It's like something broke inside him and never got fixed." Marianne absorbed the information in silence. Suddenly, many things made sense. The empty house, the loneliness, the melancholy that permeated every room. Reese wasn't just living there. He was surviving amidst the wreckage of a life that had crumbled. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Gable continued, lowering her voice. "Nobody talks about it much, but I've heard him muttering things during his attacks. He talks about a woman who appears in his dreams, a figure he sees when he's at his worst. It seems this image is the only thing that brings him any relief. I know it sounds strange, but that's what I've heard." Marianne felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in that account that unsettled her, a feeling that she was being pulled into a story she didn't fully understand. In the following days, Marianne began to observe Reese with new eyes. He was no longer just the reclusive boss, but someone who carried a pain so deep, it manifested physically. She started paying attention to the details, the coffee cups he left around the house always half full, the books he started reading and abandoned, the nights when his footsteps in the corridor stretched into the early morning. One afternoon, while watering the plants near the lake, Marianne stood watching the willow tree. The tree was old, with a thick, gnarled trunk, and the branches that hung towards the water had an almost melancholy aspect. Mrs. Gable had mentioned that the willow had been dry for years, that it no longer blossomed, but it still stood there, stubborn, like a symbol of something that refused to die completely. Marianne touched the necklace on her neck, remembering her grandmother's words. Healing and resilience. Did that tree also carry some greater meaning? Or was it just another element of this sad landscape? It was in that moment of contemplation that she heard it, a distant sound coming from the direction of the house. It wasn't a scream, but something close to it, a muffled groan, filled with despair. Marianne dropped the watering can and ran. She crossed the garden, climbed the veranda steps and entered through the back door. The sound was coming from upstairs. She ran up, her heart pounding, following her instinct. When she reached the corridor, she saw the door to Reese's room ajar. She pushed it open slowly and found him sitting on the bed, his hands trembling uncontrollably and his face covered in sweat. He was trying to open a pill bottle, but his fingers wouldn't obey. The bottle fell to the floor, scattering the pills across the carpet. Reese hunched over, his breathing completely erratic. Marianne entered without asking permission. She knelt in front of him and took his trembling hands in hers. They were ice cold. She began to speak, keeping her voice firm and calm, repeating the same words she had used before. "It's okay. I'm here. Breathe with me. Slowly. Inhale. Exhale." His eyes met hers, and for an instant, Marianne saw not only despair, but also a silent plea for help. She continued to hold his hands, breathing in an exaggerated way so he could follow the rhythm. Slowly, very slowly, the tremors began to subside. His breathing started to regulate, and when he finally managed to take a deep breath, releasing the air trapped in his lungs, Marianne felt an immense relief. "Are you okay now?" He nodded but didn't let go of her hands. He just stayed there, holding on as if they were the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. Marianne didn't pull away. She just remained, offering the silent presence he seemed to so desperately need. When he finally let go, Reese murmured a nearly inaudible thank you and turned his face away, ashamed. Marianne collected the pills from the floor, put them back in the bottle, and left it on the bedside table. She left the room without another word, but with the feeling that something had changed. She didn't know exactly what, but there was a connection now. Invisible, fragile, but real. That night, lying in her bed, Marianne couldn't stop thinking about Reese, about the pain he carried, about the house that seemed to absorb all that sadness. And for the first time since she had arrived, she wondered if she hadn't been brought to this place for some reason greater than simply needing a job. Perhaps there was something in this story that still needed to be written, something that involved not only Reese but also herself. She touched the willow necklace again and closed her eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. But before she fell asleep, one last image crossed her mind: the lake, the willow tree, and a strange feeling that soon that scene would be the stage for something that would change everything. In the days that followed, Marianne began to notice that Reese was different, not completely, but there were small changes. He started appearing a bit more in the common areas. He didn't talk much, but sometimes he would accept the coffee Mrs. Gable offered in the kitchen instead of immediately locking himself in the study. And on a few occasions, when he passed Marianne in the corridors, he would give a subtle nod of his head, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that she was there. Mrs. Gable commented on it one morning as they prepared lunch together. "I don't know what you did, love, but I think it's helping. He seems a little less lost." Marianne didn't know what to say. She didn't think she had done anything special. She had just been present in the moments he needed her. But maybe that was exactly what he had never had. Someone who was simply there, without judging, without demanding, without expecting anything in return. Mr. Wallace noticed too. One afternoon, when Marianne was helping to prune the rose bushes in the garden, he commented, "The boss has been calmer. It's been a long time since I've seen him so, I don't know, less tense. You have a gift, miss." Marianne gave an awkward smile, changing the subject. But inside, she felt a mix of satisfaction and concern. Satisfaction because somehow she was managing to make a difference. Concern because she didn't know how far this could go, nor what the boundaries were, of this relationship that was forming. It was on a rainy afternoon, as a storm battered the hills with force, that Marianne decided to explore the library more thoroughly. She had always loved books, and this collection was impressive. She walked along the shelves, running her fingers over the old spines, reading titles in English, French, German. There was everything there. Classic novels, books on philosophy, works of history. It was as if someone at some point had tried to build a refuge of knowledge in this isolated place. On one of the lower shelves, she found a wooden box. It wasn't locked, but it seemed to have been forgotten there. She opened it carefully and found inside some yellowed letters, old photographs, and a leather-bound notebook. She looked around, making sure she was alone, and picked up the notebook. The first few pages were blank, but then notes began. It was Reese's handwriting. She recognized it from documents she had seen in the kitchen. The notes were fragmented, disjointed, like thoughts thrown onto paper without much order. I can't sleep anymore. The nights are too long. I wake up thinking I'm still in that day, the day everything ended. The day I found out that nothing I believed in was real. Marianne felt a lump in her throat. She kept reading, knowing she was invading his privacy, but unable to stop. Claire said she never really loved me, that it was all a mistake from the beginning. How can someone live for years beside another person and feel that? How can you look into their eyes every day and lie so well? I gave everything. My time, my trust, my dreams, and I found out I was alone the whole time. The following pages were even more painful. Reese described the discovery of the affair, the way the life he knew had crumbled in a matter of days. He wrote about sleepless nights, about the feeling of floating in an endless void. And then, on a page marked with a fold, he wrote about the dreams. There's a woman who appears when I'm at rock bottom. I don't know who she is, I've never seen her face clearly, but I feel she's there, holding me, keeping me from falling completely. It's strange, but it's the only thing that brings me any relief, as if there's a promise in the air, that one day when the pain is too much, someone will appear and pull me back. Marianne closed the notebook, her hands trembling. This was disturbing, not because of the details of Reese's pain, but because of the similarity to what Mrs. Gable had mentioned, and more than that, because of the strange feeling she herself had felt since arriving at that house, as if she had been guided there by something more than chance. She put everything back in the box and left the library, her heart racing. She needed air. She went down to the garden even, with the fine rain still falling, and walked to the edge of the lake. The willow tree moved in the wind, its branches swaying like arms trying to reach for something out of reach. Marianne stood there, letting the rain wet her face, mixing with the tears that began to fall without her noticing. Why was she crying? She wasn't sure. Maybe for Reese's pain, maybe for her own pain, which she had been sweeping under the rug for so long, or maybe because, in this strange and melancholy place, she had finally found someone who understood what it was, to carry an invisible weight on their chest, someone who, just like her, was just trying to survive each day. When she went back inside, soaked, she found Mrs. Gable in the kitchen preparing dinner. Goodness, you'll catch pneumonia like that. Go take a hot shower and change your clothes. Marianne obeyed, but before she did, she asked, Mrs. Gable, does Mr. Davies have any family? Anyone who comes to visit? The cook sighed, stirring the pot on the stove. No. After Claire left, he distanced himself from everyone. He had some friends, some cousins, but he cut contact. I think the shame was too great. He didn't want anyone to see him like that. Dr. Richards is practically the only outsider he agrees to see. And her family? Claire's? They never showed up here again. I think no one wants to remember what happened. Marianne went up to her room, took a hot shower and changed. She lay down on the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything she had discovered, about everything she still didn't understand. And as the night wore on outside, she wondered if she was really prepared for what was to come. Because deep down she knew something was about to happen, something that would change not only Reese's life but hers as well, and when it happened, there would be no going back. Chapter 2. The routine at the mansion began to take on more defined contours in the following weeks. Marianne would wake up early, even before the sun had fully risen, and go down to help Mrs. Gable prepare breakfast. There was something comforting about that large kitchen, with its copper pans hanging on the wall, the smell of fresh bread coming from the oven, and the cook's quiet conversation, who always had some story to tell about the times when the mansion was full of life and movement. Mr. Wallace would arrive around 7, always punctual, with his gardening tools, and that quiet way of someone who prefers the company of plants to that of humans. Marianne liked to watch him work, the dedicated way he cared for each flower bed, as if every rose and every shrub were his personal responsibility. Sometimes he would stop to wipe the sweat from his brow and stare at the lake with a distant expression, and Marianne would wonder what went through the mind of this man who had witnessed so many changes in that place. Rhys continued to be a ghostly presence. Some days he would appear a little more, accept a cup of coffee, exchange a few words with Mrs. Gable. Other days he simply wouldn't leave the study, and Marianne only knew he was alive because she saw the light on under the door at night. She had learned to respect that space, not to force contact, but also to be alert for signs that he might need help. It was on a Friday morning that Dr. Richards arrived earlier than usual. Marianne was cleaning the hall when he entered, greeting her with a polite nod before heading to the study. This time, the door was completely closed, and the conversation happening inside was just a muffled murmur. Marianne tried to continue with her tasks, but curiosity gnawed at her. When the doctor finally came out, almost an hour later, he had a worried expression on his face. He stopped when he saw Marianne and hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to say something. Finally, he approached her. "You're Marianne, right? The new employee." "Yes, sir, I've been here for almost a month." Dr. Richards adjusted his glasses and glanced towards the study before turning his attention back to her. "I've noticed some changes in Rhys. Small, but significant. Mrs. Gable mentioned that you've been helping when he has his attacks. I wanted to thank you for that. It's not easy to deal with someone in his state." Marianne felt her face flush. "I just do what I can. I don't have any training. I don't know if I'm really helping. You are, believe me. The fact that he accepts your presence in those moments is already a huge step forward. Rhys usually shuts down completely when he's having an attack. He doesn't let anyone near, but with you it seems to be different." There was something in the doctor's tone that made Marianne uncomfortable, as if he were reading between the lines something she hadn't even admitted to herself yet. Dr. Richards continued, "I just wanted to ask you to be patient with him, and if you notice any significant worsening, please call me immediately. He has my number here on the fridge. The trauma he suffered was severe and recovery is slow. Sometimes it seems like he's getting better, and then suddenly everything falls apart again." "I'll keep an eye out," Marianne promised. When the doctor left, she kept thinking about that conversation. Changes. What exactly had Dr. Richards noticed? She herself couldn't clearly define what was happening between her and Rhys. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't just work. It was something more subtle, a silent connection that was forming in moments of crisis, in the quick glances they exchanged when they passed in the corridors, in the way he had started to relax a little when she was around. That afternoon, Marianne decided to tidy the music room. It was a room that no one used, but it had a special charm with its grand piano covered by a white sheet and the tall windows that let in the golden light of the late afternoon. She carefully removed the sheet, revealing the polished and flawless instrument. She ran her fingers over the keys, producing a dissonant sound that echoed through the empty room. "Do you play?" Rhys's voice made her jump. He was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, his hands in his trouser pockets. He looked more rested than the last few times she had seen him, though he still carried that tired expression in his eyes. "No," Marianne replied, moving away from the piano as if she had been caught doing something wrong. "I was just cleaning." "My mother used to play," he said, entering the room and walking towards the instrument. "She would spend hours in here playing Chopin, Debussy. She said music was the only thing that kept her sane in this big, quiet house." It was the first time Rhys had shared something personal so spontaneously. Marianne didn't want to interrupt, just stood there waiting for him to continue if he wanted to. "When she passed away, I couldn't bring myself to come in here anymore. It felt like the piano held her presence, you know? As if by playing it, I would be desecrating a memory." He ran his hand over the polished surface, his fingers trembling slightly. "It's been 10 years since she's been gone, and I still miss her every day." Marianne felt her chest tighten. There was so much accumulated pain in that man, so much loss he carried alone. She took a step forward hesitantly. "I'm sure she would be happy to know you still remember her so fondly." Reese looked up, and for the first time since Marianne had arrived at that house, he truly looked at her. It wasn't a quick or distracted glance, but a deep look, as if he were trying to understand who this woman was, who had appeared in his life so unexpectedly. "You remind me of someone," he said, his voice low. "I don't know who, but there's something about you that is familiar." Before Marianne could respond, he had already left the room, leaving her alone with the silent piano and a whirlwind of thoughts. What did he mean by that? She reminded him of someone. Who? The figure from the dreams he had mentioned in his journal? That night, Marianne had trouble sleeping. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about the conversation with Reese, about Dr. Richards's words, about everything she had discovered since she arrived. There were pieces of a puzzle scattered around her, but she couldn't assemble them in a way that made sense. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and went down to the kitchen to make some tea. The house was plunged in darkness, only illuminated by the faint moonlight coming through the windows. Marianne turned on the kitchen light and put water on to boil. While she waited, she looked out the window at the garden outside. That's when she saw a shadow moving near the lake. Her heart pounded. It was Reese. He was walking towards the bank with slow, almost shuffling steps. Something about the way he moved made Marianne feel a tightness in her chest. Something was wrong. She turned off the stove and went out the back door barefoot, running across the dew-wet lawn. The distance to the lake seemed enormous, and she quickened her pace, her heart beating erratically. When she reached the bank, Reese was standing at the water's edge, staring intently at the dark lake. Marianne approached slowly, afraid of startling him. "Reese?" He didn't turn. He just kept looking at the water, as if hypnotized. "Sometimes I imagine how easy it would be," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Just to walk in and let the water wash it all away. The pain, the memories, the weight of waking up every day without knowing why." Marianne felt tears burn her eyes. She knew exactly what he was talking about. She knew that kind of weariness, that deep exhaustion from carrying an invisible burden every day. She moved closer, standing beside him. "I understand," she said softly. "There are days I feel that too, like the world is too heavy and I don't have the strength to hold it up." Reese finally looked at her, surprised to find her there. "You? But you seem so strong." Marianne gave a sad laugh. "It's just an appearance. Inside, I'm full of cracks. I came here running away too, you know." Running. From a life that fell apart, from a relationship that left me empty, from a version of myself I no longer recognize. They stood side by side, looking at the lake in silence. There was a strange intimacy in that moment, as if they had shed all their masks and could finally be honest about the fragility they shared. "What keeps you going?" Reese asked. "What makes you carry on, even when everything seems pointless?" Marianne touched the necklace at her throat, feeling the texture of the willow wood. "My grandmother used to say that we're stronger than we think, that even when we think we're going to break, we still have the ability to bend and endure. I don't know if I really believe that, but I try to hold on to that idea on the hardest days." Reese stared at the necklace, and something flickered in his eyes. An expression Marianne couldn't decipher. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "The pendant. It was my grandmother's. Willow. She said it represents healing." They remained there for a few more minutes, until Reese finally took a deep breath and stepped away from the bank. "Thank you," he said, "for coming, for not trying, to convince me that everything will be okay." Marianne smiled faintly. "I wouldn't lie to you. I don't know if it will be okay, but I know you're not alone. And sometimes, that's all we need to know." When they returned to the house, they each went to their own room in silence. But something had changed that dawn by the lake. A door had opened between them, allowing the vulnerability of one to find an echo in the vulnerability of the other. The following days were different. Reese started to appear more, not much but enough for his presence to be noticed. He had breakfast in the kitchen instead of locking himself in the study. He asked Mr. Wallace questions about the garden, and surprisingly, He started talking to Marianne. Brief conversations about trivial matters, but they carried an emotional weight that went far beyond the words exchanged. Mrs. Gable was radiant. "I don't know what you did, love, but keep doing it. It's been years since I've seen him like this. It's like a little bit of light has returned to his eyes." Marianne didn't know what she had done. She had just been honest, had shared. Her own fragility had shown him that he wasn't the only one carrying invisible scars. And maybe that was exactly what he needed. Not someone to try and fix him, but someone who understood what it was like to be broken. One Tuesday afternoon, while Marianne was organizing the books in the library, Rhys came in and sat in one of the old armchairs. "Do you like to read?" Marianne turned, surprised to see him there. "I do. I always have. When I was a child, I spent hours at the public library near my house. It was my way of escaping reality." Rhys nodded, looking at the packed shelves. "My father built this library. He used to say a man without books is a man without a soul. He spent his whole life collecting these works. When he passed away, I tried to continue his legacy, but I ended up abandoning it. I haven't been able to concentrate on anything for a long time." Marianne took a book from the shelf and brought it to him. "How about starting with something light? Sometimes we need simple stories that don't demand too much from us." Rhys took the book, looking at the cover. It was a collection of short stories, tales about ordinary people facing small everyday dilemmas. He opened it to the first page and read a few lines before closing it again. "Maybe," he said, placing the book beside the armchair. "Maybe I'll try." Marianne smiled, feeling like she was witnessing small miracles happening, small steps from someone who had been completely lost and was now trying to find their way back. But not all was good news. One night, Marianne was awakened by screams coming from Rhys's room. She jumped out of bed and ran down the corridor, finding Mrs. Gable already standing in front of his door, knocking urgently. "Mr. Davies, open the door. Are you all right?" There was no answer. Only the screams continued, muffled, like someone trapped in a nightmare. Marianne tried the handle, and to her surprise, the door was unlocked. They went in together and found Rhys in bed, thrashing in the sheets, his face contorted in an expression of pure terror. He was clearly having a violent nightmare. Mrs. Gable tried to wake him, calling his name, but he didn't respond. Marianne approached and held his shoulders firmly, shaking him gently. "Rhys, wake up, it's just a dream." He opened his eyes suddenly, wide and disoriented. It took him a few seconds to realize where he was, and when his gaze finally focused on Marianne, his breathing was completely erratic. She kept her hands on his shoulders, speaking calmly. "It's okay. You were having a nightmare. You're home. You're safe." Gradually, his breathing returned to normal. Mrs. Gable brought a glass of water, and he drank it in short sips, still trembling. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out hoarse. "It was her. I saw her, but I couldn't reach her, and the more I tried, the further away she got." "Who?" Marianne asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Rhys shook his head, as if trying to push the image away. "I don't know. I never know. It's always the same woman, but I never see her face. I just feel that she's there and that if I can get to her, everything will make sense again." Mrs. Gable and Marianne exchanged a worried look. The cook straightened the sheets and suggested he try to get some more rest, but Rhys refused. He said he didn't want to go back to sleep, afraid of falling into the same nightmare. So Marianne offered, "Do you want to go downstairs for some tea? Sometimes it helps." He accepted, and the three of them went down to the kitchen. Mrs. Gable made some chamomile tea, and they sat there talking about trivial things, trying to distract Rhys from the ghosts that haunted him. When the first light of dawn began to color the sky, Mrs. Gable excused herself to start preparing breakfast, leaving Marianne and Rhys alone at the table. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I know. You must be tired." Marianne shook her head. "I don't mind. I couldn't sleep properly either." Rhys looked at her with curiosity. "What keeps you awake?" Marianne hesitated, fiddling with her empty cup. "Memories, regrets, the feeling that I've made wrong decisions and don't know how to go back." "Tell me," he asked, surprisingly gentle. And Marianne found herself telling him. She told him about her relationship with Ben, about how he made her feel like she was never good enough. about the promises he made and never kept, about the day she finally found the strength to end it, but still carried the guilt of having wasted years on someone who didn't value her. Rhys listened in silence, just nodding from time to time, without judging. When she finished, he said softly, "You were brave. Ending something that doesn't make you happy, even when you've invested so much time, is one of the hardest things there is. I didn't have that courage. I stayed until the end, even seeing the signs, until the decision was brutally taken from me." Marianne touched his hand on the table, a quick gesture of comfort. It wasn't a lack of courage. Sometimes we hold on because we still believe things can change. There's nothing wrong with that. They stayed there until the sun had fully risen, sharing pieces of their stories, slowly assembling a mosaic of pains and hopes that had more in common than either of them had imagined. In the following weeks, this closeness continued. Rhys began to seek out Marianne's company more deliberately. He would ask her to join him for walks in the garden. He showed her books he thought she would like, and slowly he began to smile. They weren't wide or frequent smiles, but they were there, small rays of light breaking through the heavy clouds that had covered his face for so long. Mrs. Gable would comment to Mr. Wallace, who in turn would comment to Marianne, creating a network of observations and hopes that perhaps, finally, Rhys was finding his way back. But Marianne also felt something changing within her. What had started as simple empathy for someone in pain was turning into something more complex. She found herself thinking about Rhys at the most unexpected moments, about the way he ran a hand through his hair when he was thoughtful, about the tone of his voice when he talked about the books he loved, about the rare moments when he laughed, and how that sound completely transformed his appearance, making him look years younger. This scared her. Marianne hadn't come here looking for this. She didn't want to get emotionally involved with anyone, let alone her boss, a man who was clearly fragile and dealing with deep traumas. But the heart doesn't ask for permission, doesn't wait for the right moment. It just feels. It was on a Sunday afternoon, when the mansion was particularly quiet, that Rhys invited her to watch the sunset by the lake. Marianne accepted, and they walked together through the garden until they reached the bank. The willow tree swayed gently in the wind, and the golden light of the late afternoon painted everything in warm, melancholy hues. They sat on the grass side by side, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Rhys was calmer than Marianne had ever seen him, with an almost serene expression on his face. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I had forgotten what it's like to be alive. It sounds silly, but it's true. I spent so long just existing, not really living, that I forgot there are still beautiful things in the world." Marianne turned to look at him, feeling her chest tighten. "And what made you remember?" Rhys looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes, something beyond the usual sadness. "You," he answered simply. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken meanings. Marianne didn't know what to say, didn't know how to handle that declaration that was both simple and profound. Before she could say anything, Rhys looked back at the lake. "Sorry if that was strange. I just meant that your presence here has made a difference. You made me remember that there's still kindness in the world, that there are still people who care without expecting anything in return." Marianne felt tears threaten to fall. She lightly touched his arm. "You've made a difference for me, too. You helped me realize I'm not alone in this feeling of being broken, and that maybe, together, we can pick up the pieces." Rhys smiled, and it was the most genuine smile she had ever seen on him. They stayed there until the sun had completely disappeared, and when they returned to the house, Marianne knew that something fundamental had changed between them. It was no longer just empathy or compassion. There was a real bond, built on shared vulnerability and a mutual understanding that went beyond words. That night, lying in her bed, Marianne looked at the ceiling and tried to understand what was happening. Was she falling in love? Was that it? Or was it just gratitude for having found someone who understood her? She had no answers, but she knew she could no longer deny what she felt. And that certainty, both comforting and terrifying, kept her awake until the early hours of the morning. Meanwhile, on the other side of the corridor, Rhys was also awake, staring into the darkness of his room. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely lost. There was a light, small but real, shining in the midst of the darkness. And that light had Marianne's face, had her soft voice, had the way she touched her willow necklace when she was thoughtful. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew he didn't want it to end. For the first time in a long time, he had something worth waking up for the next day. Chapter 3. Spring arrived, bringing with it a subtle change in the mansion's atmosphere. The garden flowers began to bloom, filling the air with sweet perfumes, and the days grew longer, with sunlight flooding the rooms that once seemed eternally plunged in shadow. Marianne had been there for almost 3 months, and the house that initially felt strange and oppressive had now become a refuge. Not a home exactly, but a place where she could breathe without feeling the constant weight of the outside world. Her relationship with Rhys continued to deepen in ways she could no longer ignore. They had established an almost intimate routine. Every afternoon after he finished whatever he did, locked in his study, they would walk together through the garden. Rhys would talk about the books he was trying to read again, about childhood memories in that house, about the parents who were no longer there. Marianne would listen, share her own stories, and slowly they built a joint narrative, woven from comfortable silences and whispered confidences. Mrs. Gable observed everything with a mixture of joy and concern. One morning, as they prepared lunch together, she commented, "Marianne, I don't want to meddle where I'm not wanted, but I need to tell you something. I see how you two look at each other, and I'm happy, truly, because it's been years since I've seen Rhys like this. But it also worries me." "Why?" Marianne asked, feeling her stomach tighten. The cook sighed, placing the wooden spoon on the counter. "Because he's still very fragile, love. As much better as he is now, he still carries a lot inside, and I don't want either of you to get hurt from this. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Marianne understood perfectly. She understood. She was treading on dangerous ground, that she was allowing herself to feel things for someone who might not be in a condition to reciprocate in a healthy way. But how could she stop something that had already begun? How could she pretend her heart didn't race every time he entered the same room as her? How could she ignore the way he looked at her, as if she were the only solid thing in a world that insisted on crumbling? "I'll be careful," she promised, though she wasn't sure if it was a promise she could keep. That afternoon, Rhys invited her for a different kind of walk. Instead of staying in the garden, he suggested they walk the trail that surrounded the property. Marianne accepted, and they set off together under a blue sky dotted with white clouds. The trail climbed through the trees, offering views of the surrounding hills, and Rhys seemed more cheerful than usual. "It's been years since I've been up here," he said, taking a deep breath of the fresh mountain air. "I used to walk this trail every week when I was younger. It was my way of clearing my head." "Why did you stop?" Marianne asked, ducking under a low branch. "Because I stopped wanting to clear my head. I preferred to let everything pile up inside until there was no more room. It was easier than dealing with things for real." They walked in silence for a while, until they reached a high point from which they could see the entire property below. The mansion looked even bigger from there, imposing and solitary in the midst of the green. The lake shimmered in the sun, and the willow tree was just a dark spot on the bank. "It's beautiful from here," Marianne commented. "It is, but it's also frightening," Rhys replied. "Seeing it all from a distance makes me realize how isolated I've let myself become, as if I've built walls so high that now I don't know how to get out." Marianne turned to face him. "But you are getting out, slowly, but you are, and you're not alone in this." Rhys looked at her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. He took a step towards her, hesitant, as if testing his own limits. "Marianne, I need to tell you something, and I don't know if it's the right time or if there is a right time for this, but if I don't say it now, I think I'll explode." Her heart raced. She knew what was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way he looked at her, in the tension that was building between them. "You saved me," he continued, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Not just in those attacks, but in a much deeper way. You saved me from myself, and I don't know how to thank you for that, because words seem insufficient." "You don't need to thank me," Marianne whispered. "I did it because I wanted to, because I care." "I care too," he said, and there was a vulnerability in those words that made her heart ache. "I care more than I should, more than is wise. And I know this is complicated. I know you work here. I know I'm still dealing with a lot of things. But I can't pretend I don't feel it anymore." Marianne felt tears threaten to fall. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I can't pretend anymore either." Rhys raised his hand and lightly touched her face, his thumb, stroking her cheek. It was a gentle, almost reverent touch, as if he were afraid of breaking her. Marianne closed her eyes, absorbing the sensation, that moment that seemed suspended in time. When she opened her eyes again, she saw he was looking at the necklace around her neck. "That necklace," he murmured. "There's something about it that fascinates me. I can't explain it." Marianne touched the pendant, feeling the familiar texture of the willow wood. "It was my grandmother's. She said it had healing powers." Rhys smiled, but there was something strange in his eyes, as if he were remembering something, but couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "Maybe it does," he said softly. They stayed there on the high trail for a while longer, talking, laughing, sharing this new intimacy that was still fragile, but promising. When they returned to the mansion, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marianne felt light, as if she had released a weight she had been carrying for months. For the first time since she had ended things with Ben, she allowed herself to feel hope about someone. But fate, as always, had its own plans. 2 days later, on a hot November afternoon, Marianne was in the garden helping Mr. Wallace prune the rose bushes when she heard a strange noise coming from the direction of the lake. It was a muffled sound, like a thud, followed by a splash. Mr. Wallace heard it too and frowned. What was that? Marianne dropped the pruning shears and ran. Something inside her, a primal instinct, screamed that something was very wrong. Her heart pounded as she crossed the lawn, her bare feet sinking into the soft grass. When she reached the edge of the lake, she saw a scene that made her blood run cold. Rhys was in the water not far from the bank, but clearly in distress. He wasn't drowning in the literal sense, but his body was rigid, his arms flailing uncoordinatedly in the water, and his face was contorted in an expression of pure terror. It was an attack, one of the worst Marianne had ever seen. And he was alone, vulnerable, on the verge of sinking completely. She didn't think. She just acted. She threw herself into the water without hesitation, feeling the icy cold envelop her body. She swam with all her might until she reached him, and when she finally managed to grab hold of him, she realized how heavy he was. Not physically, but emotionally. It was as if the entire weight of the pain he carried had materialized in that moment. "Rhys, look at me! It's me, Marianne! You're safe!" But he couldn't hear her. He was trapped in his own private hell, his eyes glazed over, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Marianne dragged him to the bank, using all the strength she had. Mr. Wallace had come running and helped pull him out of the water. They laid him on the grass, and Marianne knelt beside him, holding his face in her hands. "Rhys, please, come back. I'm here. You're not alone." The tremors wouldn't stop. His body shook violently, and Marianne could feel his heart beating erratically under her palms. That's when something inside her broke, a despair so deep, so visceral, that it eliminated any rational thought. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a kiss in the romantic sense, but a desperate, almost primitive gesture, as if she were trying to breathe life into him to bring him back from the abyss where he was lost. And then, miraculously, something happened. The tremors ceased. His breathing, which had been erratic and shallow, began to regulate. His rigid body gradually relaxed, and when Marianne finally pulled away, she saw that his eyes were open, focused on her. But there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't the Rhys she knew. There was confusion there, a deep disorientation, but also something more. Recognition, as if he was seeing her for the first time, yet at the same time as if he had known her forever. "You came," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I knew you would come." Marianne frowned, not understanding. "Rhys, it's me." "Marianne, are you okay? Do you know where you are?" He smiled, and it was a strange, almost dreamy smile. You came back. I waited so long, I thought I had lost you forever. Marianne's heart pounded, but not with relief. Something was very wrong. Mr. Wallace was beside them, equally confused. Mr. Davies, you need to rest. Let's get you inside. But Reese didn't take his eyes off Marianne. He raised a hand and touched her face with a tenderness that left her completely bewildered. I missed you, he said. All these years, but now you're here. And everything is all right. Finally, everything is all right. Marianne looked at Mr. Wallace, seeking help, but the gardener was as lost as she was. They managed to get Reese to his feet, and he followed them docilely to the house, but the whole time he kept his eyes fixed on Marianne, as if afraid she would disappear if he blinked. Mrs. Gable was terrified to see them enter, soaked. She ran to get towels and dry clothes and helped Marianne take Reese to his room. He allowed himself to be led without resistance, but when Marianne tried to leave the room so he could change, he held her hand. Don't go. Please, don't go away again. I won't, she promised, not knowing exactly what she was promising. I'll be right here outside. You can get changed. I'm not going anywhere. He hesitated, but finally let go of her hand. Mrs. Gable closed the door, and the two women stood in the corridor, looking at each other with expressions of pure concern. What happened down there? The cook asked. Marianne told her. Everything from the moment she heard the noise to Reese's strange behavior after she pulled him from the water. Mrs. Gable turned pale. We need to call Dr. Richards. Now. She ran downstairs to make the call, and Marianne stood there, leaning against the corridor wall, trying to process what had just happened. Why had Reese spoken like that? As if she was someone he had known for a long time. As if she had come back from somewhere. The bedroom door opened, and Reese came out, already dressed in dry clothes. He went straight to Marianne and hugged her, airtight, desperate hug, as if she were the only thing anchoring him to reality. I was so afraid you weren't real, he murmured against her hair, that you were just another dream. Marianne didn't know what to do. She hugged him back, feeling his body trembling slightly, but her own heart was racing with confusion and worry. What was happening? Who did Reese think she was? Dr. Richards arrived less than an hour later, and Marianne had never been so relieved to see someone. The doctor examined Reese in private in the study, while Marianne, Mrs. Gable, and Mr. Wallace waited anxiously in the living room. When the doctor finally came out, his expression was grave. We need to talk, he said, looking directly at Marianne. They sat down, and Dr. Richards began to explain. Reese has suffered what we call an acute dissociative episode. The emotional trauma he's been carrying, combined with the severe panic attack he had at the lake, caused a kind of temporary break with reality. He's confused, disoriented in time and identity. Right now, he's not fully aware of who you really are, Marianne. She felt her blood run cold. What do you mean? The doctor sighed, taking off his glasses to clean them nervously. He's projecting onto you the image of someone from his past. I don't know exactly who, but from the things he said during the examination, it seems to be a female figure who held an important place in his psyche. It could be an idealization of his ex-wife in better times. It could be a maternal figure, or it could simply be a mental construction of someone he wished existed. The human brain does strange things when under extreme stress. But will he recover? Will he go back to normal? Asked Mrs. Gable. Dr. Richards put his glasses back on. Probably. This type of dissociative state is usually temporary. It can last for hours, days, or in rarer cases, weeks. But here's the problem. If you contradict his narrative now, if you try to force him to see reality abruptly, you could cause an even greater shock. He could have another breakdown, possibly more severe. So what should we do? Marianne asked, her voice trembling. The doctor looked at her seriously. For the next few days, maybe a week, it's best that you don't contradict him directly. If he calls you by another name, don't correct him. If he talks about memories you don't share, just listen. Keep him calm, stable, until his brain can process the trauma and gradually return to normal. But isn't that dangerous? Won't it confuse him even more? Questioned Mr. Wallace. It may seem counterintuitive, but no. Right now his mind needs this defense mechanism. It's like a temporary bandage. When he's strong enough, his own mind will start to deconstruct this narrative. Our role is to ensure he's safe and stable during this process. Marianne felt the weight of that responsibility fall on her shoulders. She would have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. She would have to inhabit a fantasy created by Reese's broken mind. And the worst part was that a part of her, a small but undeniable part, was curious. Who was this person he saw in her? What role did she occupy in his imagination? Dr. Richards prescribed some medication to help with anxiety and sleep, and left clear instructions that any worsening should be reported immediately. Before leaving, he pulled Marianne aside. "I know this is a lot for you to carry. If at any point you feel you can't handle it, call me. We can consider hospitalization, though I'd prefer to avoid that if possible. But your mental health is also important. Don't sacrifice yourself beyond what you can bear." Marianne thanked him, though she wasn't sure she could follow that advice. She was already too emotionally involved to simply walk away. When she returned to Reese's room, she found him sitting on the bed, flipping through an old photo album. He looked up when he saw her and smiled, and it was such a genuine, affectionate smile that it made her heart ache. "Come here," he called, patting the space beside him on the bed. "I want to show you something." Marianne approached hesitantly and sat down. Reese turned the album so she could see. They were old photographs of the mansion, from when there was still life and movement there. Parties, family gatherings, moments of joy captured in time. "Remember that day?" he asked, pointing to a photo of a birthday. "You were wearing that blue dress I loved so much." Marianne looked at the photo, but there was no woman in a blue dress there, just a group of people she didn't recognize. She swallowed hard and forced a smile. "How could I forget?" Reese took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I knew you would come back. Even when everyone said I was crazy for waiting, I knew. Because what we have is stronger than anything. It's stronger than time, stronger than distance." Marianne felt tears burn her eyes. Here she was, in the middle of a completely surreal situation, pretending to be someone she wasn't to help a man who had just confessed his feelings for her a few hours earlier, but who now confused her with a ghostly figure from his past. In the following days, Marianne lived in a kind of limbo between reality and fantasy. Reese was different, more open, more affectionate, more present. He sought her out constantly, wanted to spend all his time with her, told stories of a past they had never shared. And Marianne, following the doctor's instructions, just listened, nodded, pretended to remember. But there was something disturbing about it all. Reese spoke of specific moments, of conversations they had supposedly had, of promises they had allegedly made to each other, and the more he talked, the more Marianne felt trapped in a web. She didn't fully understand. Who was this woman he saw in her? And why did the description he gave fit so perfectly with things she actually felt, even if they had never happened? One night, when Reese finally fell asleep after hours of talking, Marianne went down to the kitchen where she found Mrs. Gable making tea. "I can't do this anymore," she confessed, sitting at the table. "This is consuming me. Every time he looks at me that way, every time he tells a story from this imaginary past, I feel like I'm losing myself." Mrs. Gable poured the tea and sat beside her. "Dr. Richards said it's temporary. You just have to hold on a little longer." "But what if it's not temporary? What if he never sees me as Marianne again? What if this other person, this figure he's created, is stronger than reality?" The cook had no answer for that. She just held Marianne's hand and stayed there, offering the only comfort she could: silent presence amidst the chaos. That night, alone in her room, Marianne looked at her willow necklace and for the first time since she had arrived questioned if she had made the right choice. If she had been wise to get emotionally involved with someone so broken, if it had been fair to herself and to him to allow those feelings to grow. But it was too late for those questions. She was already inside this story. And now she would have to figure out how to get out of it without destroying herself or the man who, against all odds, had managed to touch her heart so deeply. Chapter 4. The week that followed was like living in two worlds at once. On one side, there was the real Marianne, the 27-year-old woman who had fled Manchester in search of a new beginning, who carried her own scars and fears. On the other, there was the version of Marianne that existed in Rhys's confused mind, a nebulous figure he seemed to know intimately, who occupied a sacred space in his fragmented memories. Rhys was different in every possible way. The deep melancholy that had characterized him had given way to a kind of restrained joy, as if he had finally found something he had been searching for years. He would wake up early, have breakfast in the kitchen, chatting animatedly with Mrs. Gable, spend hours in the garden just watching the flowers, and constantly seek out Marianne to share thoughts, memories, or simply to be near her. One Thursday morning, he found her in the library, organizing some books that had been left out of place. "Good morning," he said, entering with a smile that completely transformed his appearance. "I was looking for you." Marianne turned, forcing a smile she hoped looked natural. "Good morning. I was just tidying up a bit in here." Rhys approached and took one of the books she was holding, flipping through it distractedly. "Remember, when we used to read together in here, you would sit in that armchair over there and I would sit on the floor leaning against your legs, and you would run your hand through my hair while you read aloud. I loved those moments." Marianne felt a lump in her throat. That had never happened. But the way he described it with such affection and nostalgia made it seem so real that for a moment she almost believed she had forgotten. "They were special moments," she replied vaguely, putting the book back on the shelf. Rhys gently pulled her by, the hand guiding her to the armchair he had mentioned. "Can we do that again, just for today? I'll choose a book and you read to me." There was a vulnerability in that request that broke Marianne's heart. How could she refuse? He was there, finally free from the anguish that had consumed him for so long, even if it was through an illusion. She nodded, and he chose a book of poetry, sitting on the floor exactly as he had described, leaning his back against the armchair where she sat. Marianne began to read. The poems were about love and loss, about memory and forgetting, about time that passes and leaves its mark. Her voice echoed in the silent library, and as she read, she could feel Rhys's hair brushing against her leg, feel his weight there, trusting and relaxed. It was too intimate, too real, and at the same time completely false, a performance based on memories that never existed. When she finished the third poem, she realized that Rhys was crying silently. Tears streamed down his face without any effort to contain them. "Rhys, what's wrong?" He wiped his face with the back of his hand without turning around. "It's just that I had forgotten what it was like to be happy, what it was like to feel that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly who I was supposed to be with. And now that you're back, I remember. And it hurts and relieves me at the same time." Marianne placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort, but felt like a complete imposter. She wasn't who he thought she was. She wasn't the person who had the power to heal him. She was just someone who had shown up, at the right time or perhaps the wrong time, and was now trapped in a role she had never asked to play. After that moment in the library, Rhys became even more attached to her. He followed her around the house, wanted to know where she was at all times, became anxious when she had to be away for too long. It wasn't controlling or suffocating behavior, but there was an emotional dependency there that frightened Marianne. And the worst part was that, at times, she found herself enjoying that attention, that unconditional affection, even knowing it wasn't truly directed at her. Mrs. Gable tried to maintain normality, but Marianne saw the worry in the cook's eyes every time Rhys called Marianne by another name or spoke of events that had never happened. One afternoon, as they were preparing dinner together, the conversation inevitably returned to the subject. "It's been a week, Marianne. The doctor said it would be temporary, but it doesn't seem to be getting better. It even seems to be getting more real for him." Marianne stirred the pot on the stove, avoiding Mrs. Gable's gaze. "I know, I'm worried too, but the doctor said not to." "Contradict him. He said it could get worse if I did. But for how long? You can't live like this forever, pretending to be someone you're not. And when he returns to normal, how will he deal with all this? With the things he's said, with the way he's acted?" These were exactly the questions Marianne avoided asking herself, because she had no answers, because any answer she imagined was painful and complicated. That night, Dr. Richards paid an unscheduled visit. Marianne was relieved to see him, hoping he would bring some solution, some clearer guidance. The doctor examined Reese, in private, and then asked to speak with Marianne in the living room. "How is he?" she asked as soon as they sat down. "Physically, he's fine. Better than he's been in years, actually. He's sleeping better, eating properly, without the anxiety attacks. But emotionally, he's still in the same state of dissociation. He still firmly believes you are someone from his past." Marianne felt the weight of those words. "And how long can this last?" Dr. Richards sighed, taking off his glasses to clean the lenses. A gesture Marianne had learned meant he was about to say something difficult. "Honestly, I don't know. Every case is different. But there's something that worries me. During the examination, I asked him about you, about this person he sees in you. And he was very specific in his descriptions. He talked about physical characteristics, a way of speaking, even the necklace you wear." Marianne instinctively touched the willow pendant at her neck. "The necklace?" "Yes. He said you always wore this necklace, that it was an important symbol between you two. But the strange thing is that when I mentioned it, I felt there was something more. As if it wasn't. Just a fantasy, but a real memory that he's projecting onto you." "That doesn't make sense," Marianne murmured. "I only met him a few months ago. How can he have real memories involving something I wear?" The doctor put his glasses back on and looked directly at her. "Marianne, I need to ask you a question, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Are you sure you never met Reese before you came to work here? Your paths never crossed somewhere?" Marianne frowned, thinking. She was absolutely certain. She had never been to this region before, had never seen that mansion or any picture of Reese. "I'm sure. Why?" "Because there's a possibility, however remote, that this figure he projects onto you is not entirely invented. It could be an amalgamation of several people, or it could be a real person he knew who, by some coincidence, bears a resemblance to you." The idea was disturbing. Marianne didn't know what was worse, being a substitute for a fantasy, or being the substitute for a real person Reese had loved and lost. "What do I do, doctor? How do I get out of this situation without destroying him?" Dr. Richards was silent for a long moment. "The truth is, there's no easy answer. We could try a more direct approach, gently confronting him with reality, but there's a risk of a severe collapse. Or we can continue as we are and hope his mind processes it naturally. But there's a risk that the longer it goes on, the harder it will be for him to accept the truth." Marianne felt like crying. She was trapped between two bad options, not knowing which path to choose. Before he left, Dr. Richards offered one more piece of advice. "Try to find out who this person is that he sees in you. Perhaps there are clues around the house, a diary, old letters. If we can understand the origin of this projection, we might have a better idea of how to help him return to reality." After the doctor left, Marianne stayed up late, thinking about what he had said. Look for clues. Find out who this ghostly figure was. It was risky, invasive, but perhaps it was the only way to understand what was happening. The next night, when Reese finally fell asleep after hours of talking to her about an imaginary past, Marianne went down silently and returned to the library. She remembered the box she had found weeks ago with Reese's journal. Maybe there was more information there, something she had missed. She found the box in the same place and opened it carefully. Besides the journal, there were yellowed letters, some old photographs, and various documents. She started with the journal, rereading the passages she already knew, but this time paying closer attention to the details. That's when she found an entry she had skipped on the first read. "I dreamt of her again. The woman from the lake. She was there on the bank wearing that wooden necklace. When I woke up, I swore I could smell her scent, as if she had really been there. The therapist says they're just projections of my mind seeking comfort, but it seems so real. She seems so real." Marianne felt a chill. The woman from the lake. The wooden necklace. It was too specific to be a coincidence. She continued reading and found more references scattered across several entries. "She always appears in the most difficult moments, as if she knows when I'm about to give up. Her eyes are kind, her voice is soft. She doesn't say much, just stands there, and somehow that's enough." And further on, "Today I drew her. I tried to capture how I see her in my dreams. Dark hair falling over her shoulders, eyes that seem to carry their own sorrows, delicate hands. I hid the drawing because I know if anyone saw it, they'd think I'm even more lost than I really am. But she's real to me, more real than many things I've experienced while awake. Marianne closed the journal, her hands trembling. She searched frantically through the box, until she found, hidden at the bottom, a folded piece of paper. She opened it carefully, already knowing what she would find. It was the drawing, and when she saw it, her heart stopped. It was her. Not exactly, but similar enough to leave no doubt. The hair, the shape of the face, even the way the figure was holding something around its neck that was clearly a necklace. Rhys had drawn this months before she appeared in his life. He had dreamed of her before they even knew of each other's existence. Marianne sat on the library floor, the drawing trembling in her hands. What did this mean? How was it possible? She didn't believe in fate, in predestination, in anything supernatural. But how could she explain this rationally? She stayed there for hours, looking for more clues. She found old letters, mostly from family, some from friends. But there was one letter in particular that caught her attention. It was addressed to Rhys, but had no return address. The handwriting was feminine, delicate, and the date was from 4 years ago. Rhys, I hope this letter finds you in a moment of peace, though I doubt there's much peace in your life lately. I heard about what happened with Claire. I heard about the way she hurt you, and even though we haven't been in contact for years, I feel I need to tell you this. You deserve to be happy. You always have. The things she said, the choices she made, they say nothing about your worth. One day when the pain lessens, you will find someone who truly sees you, someone who understands the broken parts of you and doesn't try to fix them, but simply accepts them. Keep this in your heart. With love, M. Marianne read and reread that letter. Who was M? An old friend? A cousin? And why did those words seem so familiar, as if she could have written them herself? She kept searching and found one more thing. An old photograph, yellowed with time. In it, there was a young woman, must have been in her early 20s, sitting by the lake. She was in profile, looking at the water, and wore a light-colored dress that blended with the sunlight. Marianne turned the photo over and saw an inscription on the back in the same delicate handwriting as the letter, Marina, summer 1998. Marina. Marianne's heart raced. It was similar to her own name, very similar. She looked more closely at the photograph, trying to see the details of the woman's face, but the photo was blurry, and the angle made it difficult. Even so, there was something in her posture, in the way she sat, that was strangely familiar. Marianne spent the rest of the night searching, but found nothing more about Marina. It was as if this woman had existed briefly in Rhys's life, and then disappeared without a trace except for a letter and a photograph, forgotten at the bottom of a box. When the sun began to rise, Marianne returned to her room, exhausted and more confused than ever. She lay on the bed, but couldn't sleep. Her mind spun in circles, trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. Rhys had dreamed of a woman who looked like her before he even met her. There was a person named Marina in his past, someone who seemed important, and now he was confusing her with this figure, projecting onto her a mixture of real and imaginary memories. But the question that tormented her most was, why her? Of all the people who could have shown up at that mansion to work, why her who fit so perfectly into the fantasy that Rhys's mind had created? In the following days, Marianne tried to subtly probe Rhys about Marina, but whenever she mentioned anything close to the subject, he would change the topic or simply not understand the reference. It was as if that part of his memory was blocked, inaccessible. Mrs. Gable didn't know much either. Marina. I think I've heard that name, but it was so long ago. I think she was a cousin or a family friend. I never met her personally. Why? Marianne showed the photograph to the cook, who looked at it carefully. Ah, yes. I remember vaguely now. She used to come here when Mr. Davies was younger, but I think there was some kind of falling out in the family and she stopped coming. That must have been 20 years ago or more. Why are you asking about her? Marianne didn't know how to explain without sounding completely crazy, how to say that she thought there was a connection between her, this Marina from the past, and Reese's dreams. How to express the unsettling feeling of living a story that had already been written before she was even born. "Just curious," she replied vaguely, putting the photograph away. But it wasn't just curiosity. It was an almost desperate need to understand what was happening, to find some logic in the midst of the emotional chaos her life had become. One afternoon, Reese found her in the garden, sitting near the lake, exactly where the marina in the photograph had been decades ago. He sat down beside her, taking her hand with a naturalness that still disconcerted her. "You've been quieter these days. Is everything all right?" Marianne hesitated. Part of her wanted to confront him, to ask directly about Marina, about the dreams, about everything. But she remembered the doctor's warning. Don't contradict his narrative. Don't force reality abruptly. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "About what?" Reese caressed her hand, waiting patiently. "About us. About how things have changed." He smiled, but there was a sadness in his smile. "I know I seem confused sometimes, that there are things that don't quite fit in my head. But one thing I know for sure, you being here makes everything make sense again. Even when I don't fully understand the how or the why, I know it's right, that you and I somehow were always inevitable." Marianne felt tears burn her eyes. There was so much sincerity in those words, so much genuine feeling. But it was based on an illusion, and she no longer knew if she had the strength to continue sustaining that illusion, or if it would be crueler to let it crumble. "Reese, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He looked at her attentively. "Anything. Do you remember someone named Marina?" The reaction was immediate. Reese's face turned pale, and he dropped Marianne's hand as if he had received an electric shock. He stared at the lake with an expression of deep pain, his breathing starting to become irregular. "Marina," he repeated, his voice hoarse. I shouldn't think about her. I can't." Marianne realized she had touched on something very sensitive, possibly dangerous. She tried to back down. "I'm sorry, we don't have to talk about it." But Reese continued, as if the words were being torn from him against his will. She was everything I thought I'd never have. Kind, understanding, whole. But she left. Everyone leaves in the end. Claire left, Marina left, and I was left here, alone in this house that's too big and too empty. He turned to Marianne, his eyes welling up. "But you came back. You didn't abandon me like she did. And that means everything." Marianne realized in that moment that the confusion in Reese's mind was even deeper than she had imagined. He wasn't just projecting the image of one person onto her. He was merging multiple losses, multiple pains, creating a narrative where she was simultaneously Marina, Claire before the betrayal, and perhaps even the mother he had lost, an amalgamation of everything he had loved and lost. And there, sitting by the lake with this broken man beside her, Marianne finally understood the magnitude of what she had taken on. She wasn't just helping someone in crisis, she was becoming the vessel for all the unhealed wounds of a lifetime. And she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to carry that weight. Chapter 5. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Marianne felt trapped in an increasingly complex web where every thread she pulled to try and free herself only entangled her more. Reese continued to live in his alternate reality, but there were moments when small cracks appeared, brief instances where he seemed to question his own narrative, only to quickly dive back into the illusion that kept him stable. One December morning, with the summer heat beginning to intensify in the hills, Marianne woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't exactly fear or anxiety, but a deep restlessness, as if something important was about to happen. She went down to the kitchen and found Mrs. Gable preparing coffee, but the cook was more serious than usual. "A letter came for you," she said, pointing to a white envelope on the table. Marianne picked up the envelope curiously. It was from Manchester. She immediately recognized the handwriting on the front. It was from Julia, her best friend, one of the few people she had kept in touch with after moving to the mansion. She opened it quickly and began to read. "Marianne, I hope you're doing well out there in that isolated place. I know you wanted distance, but sometimes I worry you're isolating yourself too much. I have some news. I found a great flat near my place, and the owner is looking for a flatmate. I thought of you immediately. I know you needed this time away, but maybe it's been long enough? Come back, my friend. Come back to real life. We miss you. Lots of love, Julia. Marianne read the letter twice, feeling her chest tighten. Real life, as if what she was living there wasn't real. But maybe Julia was right. Maybe she had sunk so deep into this story that she had forgotten who she was before. She first set foot in that mansion. "Bad news?" asked Mrs. Gable, pouring coffee. "Not exactly. It's just a friend wanting me to come back to Manchester." The cook sat down opposite her, with that motherly look she always used when she wanted to have a serious conversation. "And you? What do you want?" Marianne didn't know how to answer. What did she want? It had been weeks, maybe months, since she had stopped to think about what she truly desired. She had let herself be consumed by Reese's needs, by the complexity of the situation, by the feeling of being trapped in a story she couldn't control. "I don't know anymore," she admitted in a low voice. "Sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself here." Mrs. Gable reached out and gently touched her hand. "You're a good girl, Marianne. You have a big heart. But you can't sacrifice yourself forever. Reese needs professional help, not someone to sustain his illusions. And you deserve to have your own life, your own dreams. You can't spend your years erasing yourself for someone, even if you care for them very much." The words hit Marianne like a punch to the gut because they were true. She had erased herself. She had put all of herself at the service of keeping Reese stable, and in the process she had forgotten her own needs, her own limits. That afternoon, Reese found her in the music room, sitting at the piano, idly playing a few notes. He approached and stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "You're different today," he observed. "Distant." Marianne stopped playing and turned to face him. For the first time in weeks, she really looked at him. She saw the man he was beneath the confusion, beneath the projection, and she felt her heart break. "Reese, we need to talk." Something in her tone made him tense up. "About what?" Marianne took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She knew she was about to defy the doctor's instructions, but she couldn't go on like this any longer. "About us, about what's happening here." He took a step back, crossing his arms defensively. "I don't like the way you're talking. It sounds like you're going to say something bad." Marianne stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. The willow tree swayed in the wind, its long branches touching the lake's water. "Reese, do you know who I am? Who I really am?" He hesitated, and Marianne saw the confusion flash across his eyes. You're important to me. That's all that matters. But what's my name?" Silence. A heavy silence, laden with meaning. Reese opened his mouth, closed it again, tried to speak, but no name came out. Marianne saw panic begin to set in on his face. "I know who you are," he insisted, but his voice trembled. "You're the person who was always there, who came back when I needed you. Most." Marianne turned to face him, tears beginning to stream down her face. "My name is Marianne Shaw. I'm 27 years old, and I came from Manchester. We met 4 months ago, when I was hired to work here. 4 months, Reese. Not years. Not decades. 4 months." "No." He shook his head, backing away. "No, that's not right. We've known each other for much longer. I remember you. I remember everything we went through together. They're memories that don't exist, Reese. They're things your mind created to protect you from the pain, but they're not real." He pressed, his hands to his temples, his face contorting in agony. "Stop. Stop saying that. You're confusing me." Marianne approached but kept a safe distance. "I don't want to confuse you. I want to help you. But I can't do this anymore by pretending to be someone I'm not. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to you." Reese slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his breathing starting to become irregular. Marianne recognized the signs of an approaching attack and felt panic take over. She had done exactly what the doctor had told her not to do. She had confronted his narrative directly, and now he was falling apart. She ran to him and knelt beside him, taking his hands. It's okay, breathe with me. Let's breathe together, all right? But this time it was different. Rhys pushed her away, not with violence, but with a desperation that cut deeper than any physical aggression. Don't touch me. You're not real. None of this is real. I'm going crazy again, and you're just another illusion. One more thing I'm going to lose. He staggered to his feet and ran out of the room. Marianne heard his hurried footsteps down the corridor, the back door slamming, and then silence. She remained there on the floor, trembling, realizing the gravity of what she had just done. Mrs. Gable appeared at the door, alarmed. What happened? I heard shouting. I've ruined everything, Marianne whispered. I tried to make him see the truth, and now he's worse. They went out together to look for him. Mr. Wallace also joined the search, and the three of them scoured the entire property, calling Rhys's name. It was Mr. Wallace who found him sitting at the edge of the lake, his feet in the water, staring fixedly at the horizon. He was crying silently, his body shaking with suppressed sobs. Marianne approached slowly, afraid of frightening him again. She sat down beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. I'm sorry, she said softly. It wasn't the right time. I shouldn't have done that. Rhys wiped his face with the back of his hand, but didn't look at her. You're right, he said, his voice hoarse. I know you are. A part of me always knew. But it was so much easier to believe in the illusion than to face reality. Reality hurts too much. Marianne felt her own tears stream down her face. I know it hurts, but you can't live in a lie just because the truth is hard, and I can't keep feeding that lie. It's destroying me, and it's destroying you too. Rhys finally looked at her, and there was a clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there for weeks. Who are you, really? Marianne took a deep breath. I'm someone who showed up here a few months ago, broken and lost, just like you. Someone who saw your pain and recognized her own pain in it. Someone who genuinely cares about you, but who isn't the savior your mind invented. I'm just human, flawed, real. And Marina, he asked, do you know about her? Marianne nodded. I found the photograph, the letter, and I think I understand what happened. You took this memory of someone who was important, mixed it with the dreams you had, with the desire to have someone who understood you, and you created this figure. And when I showed up, looking like what you had imagined, even wearing the same type of necklace, your mind decided I was her, that I was all of them. Marina, Claire before the betrayal, your mother, all the people who loved you and left you. Rhys closed his eyes, more tears falling. I've been unfair to you. I put you in an impossible role. I forced you to carry the weight of all my losses. You didn't force me, Marianne said gently. I chose to stay. I chose to try and help. But now I realize there are limits, that I can't be everything you need. No one can. They sat there in silence for a long time, the sun beginning to set on the horizon, painting, the sky in shades of orange and purple. There was something definitive about that moment, as if it were the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another, though neither of them yet knew what the next chapter would bring. Finally, Rhys spoke. What happens now? Marianne had no answer. She only knew that something had to change, that they couldn't continue in this limbo between illusion and reality. That night, Dr. Richards was called urgently. When he arrived, he examined Rhys at length, spoke with Marianne in private, and in the end made a recommendation that none of them wanted to hear. I think it's time we consider more intensive treatment, perhaps in a specialized clinic where he can have constant supervision. Marianne felt her heart sink. Hospitalization? Not necessarily permanent hospitalization, but at least a few weeks of intensive treatment. Rhys needs to process these traumas properly, with daily therapy, possibly adjusted medication. And he needs to do it in an environment where there are no triggers that reinforce the illusions. He was saying, without saying it directly, that Marianne was one of those triggers, that her presence there was hindering more than helping. What if I leave? She asked, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. If I get out of his life, will he get better? Dr. Richards sighed. Honestly, I don't know. It might help. It might make things worse. But what I do know is that the situation as it is now is not sustainable for either of you. That night, Marianne couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened since she arrived at that mansion. She had come looking for a new beginning, a place to hide from her own pain, and she had found someone whose pain was even greater than hers. She had tried to help, but in the process she had lost herself. For the first time in months, she picked up her phone and called Julia. It was late, but her friend answered on the second ring. "Marianne, are you okay?" "Julia, I think I need to come home." And as she talked to her friend, as she heard words of support and understanding, Marianne made a decision. She couldn't stay there any longer. It wasn't fair to Reese, who needed professional help she couldn't offer. And it wasn't fair to herself, as she was erasing herself in the name of an impossible mission. In the following days, Marianne discreetly began to organize her departure. She hadn't spoken to Reese about it yet, but she started to pack her things, to mentally prepare for the farewell. Mrs. Gable noticed and was torn between relief and sadness. "It's going to be hard for him," the cook commented, "but maybe it's necessary." Reese had been different since their conversation by the lake, more present, but also more distant, as if he had built an invisible wall between himself and Marianne. They still talked, but there was a new formality there, a caution that hadn't existed before. It was on a Friday afternoon that Marianne decided it was time. She would leave on Sunday. She had booked a bus ticket, had told Julia she was coming back. All that was left was to tell Reese. She found him in the study for the first time in weeks. He was sitting at his desk, looking through some documents. When she knocked on the door, he looked up and gestured for her to come in. "Can I talk to you?" He nodded, pushing the papers aside. "Of course." Marianne entered and closed the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I'm leaving," she said finally, without beating around the bush. "On Sunday. I think it's for the best. For you and for me." Reese was very still. He didn't seem surprised, just resigned. "I understand." The silence that followed was heavy. Marianne waited for him to say something more, to try and convince her to stay, to show some emotion. But he just looked at his hands, his face unreadable. It was then that she noticed the documents he had been looking at. They were official papers, with stamps and signatures. She didn't mean to pry, but something caught her eye. They were mortgage documents. For the mansion. "Reese, what is this?" He looked at the papers and gave a tired sigh. "The truth I've been hiding from everyone. The mansion is mortgaged, has been for over a year. After Claire left, I made some bad choices, donated a large part of what I had to charities, trying to find some meaning, and what was left wasn't enough to maintain this place. In a few months I'm going to lose the house too." Marianne was shocked. "But why didn't you tell anyone?" He laughed without humor. "Pride? Shame? Fear of looking even more pathetic than I already am? Take your pick, or all of them. I had already lost my wife, my sanity, my dignity. I didn't want them to see I had even lost the ability to take care of the only thing left from my family." Marianne felt her heart break. There he was, carrying yet another pain alone, another burden he shared with no one. "Reese, you don't have to carry everything alone. Let people help. You." He looked at her with such a sad expression that she had to look away. "You're leaving. The only person who really helped me is leaving. So no, I think I have to carry it alone." The words hurt more than Marianne had expected. She took a step towards him. "I'm not leaving because I don't care. I'm leaving precisely because I care too much. Because if I stay, I'll continue to lose myself in your suffering until there's nothing left of me. And you'll keep using my presence as a crutch instead of facing your real problems." Reese stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the lake. "You're right, you always have been. I used you, I turned you into what I needed you to be instead of seeing who you really were. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that and for everything else." Marianne felt tears well up. "You don't need to apologize. We don't choose when we break. We don't choose how pain manifests itself, but you need to seek the right help. You need to go to that clinic the doctor mentioned. You need to do the work of truly healing yourself. He didn't. Reply just kept looking out the window, and Marianne knew she had said all she could say. She left the study with a heavy heart, closing the door softly behind her. That night, she finished packing. On Saturday, she helped Mrs. Gable in the kitchen for the last time, had a long talk with Mr. Wallace in the garden, and spent hours looking at the house that had become a strange part of her story. On Sunday morning, she woke up before sunrise, knowing it was time to go. She went downstairs silently, carrying her suitcase. The house was quiet, everyone still asleep. She left a letter in the kitchen for Mrs. Gable and another in the entrance hall for Reese. She wouldn't be able to say goodbye in person without breaking down. She was about to open the front door when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Reese there, dressed in crumpled clothes as if he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, and he looked exhausted. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye?" Marianne felt her throat tighten. "I thought it would be easier this way." Reese walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. "It won't be easier. None of this will be easy. But at least let me say one thing before you go." She waited, her heart pounding. "Thank you. For staying as long as you did, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for being kind when I didn't deserve kindness. You didn't save me because I needed to save myself, but you showed me that it's still worth trying, and I'll carry that with me forever." Tears streamed down Marianne's face without any effort to contain them. "Take care of yourself, Reese, really, get help, go to that clinic. And one day, when you're better, when you've found a way to live with your scars, maybe we'll meet again, in different circumstances, as different people." "Maybe," he agreed, though they both knew it probably wouldn't happen. Marianne picked up her suitcase and opened the door. The morning light flooded the hall, golden and promising. She took one last look at Reese, at the mansion behind him, at this chapter of her life that was closing, and then she left, walking down the avenue of ancient trees to the iron gate. She didn't look back. If she did, she knew she wouldn't have the strength to keep walking. Chapter 6. 3 months later, Marianne was sitting in the small flat in Manchester she shared with Julia, looking out the window at the bustling street below. The city noise had once again become part of her routine, the constant coming and going of people, cars, buses. It was the complete opposite of the profound silence of the mansion in the hills. And yet, after all this time, she still thought about that place every day. She had found a job in a bookshop in the city centre, a simple job, but one that kept her busy. In her spare time, she wrote, it had started as therapy, a way to process everything she had been through, but it had gradually become something more. A story was being born from her experiences, transformed and fictionalized, but carrying the emotional essence of everything she had felt. Julia came into the living room carrying 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside her on the sofa. "Still thinking about him?" Marianne smiled sadly. "Is it that obvious?" "You stare at that imaginary lake out the window every day, so yes, it's pretty obvious." Marianne accepted, the mug, feeling the comforting warmth in her hands. "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have stayed, tried a little harder." Julia shook her head firmly. "You did what you had to do, for you and for him. Staying would have been to slowly destroy yourself, and he needed to learn to stand on his own, not have you as an emotional crutch." Marianne knew her friend was right. She knew rationally that leaving had been the correct decision, but the heart doesn't understand rationality. The heart still missed those walks in the garden, the long conversations in the library, the way Reese looked at her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that insisted on crumbling. That afternoon, while working at the bookshop organizing the self-help shelves, Marianne saw someone who made her heart stop. It was Dr. Richards. He was flicking through a book in the medicine section, completely unaware of her presence. For a moment, she considered hiding, avoiding the encounter, but something stronger compelled her to approach. "Dr. Richards?" He looked up, and the surprise was instant, but it soon gave way to a gentle smile. "Marianne, what a surprise to see you here. How are you?" "I'm well, working here now. And you? What brings you to Manchester?" I have a medical conference in the area. I took the opportunity to see a bit of the city. There was an uncomfortable silence, both knowing the question that hung in the air. Finally, Marianne gathered her courage. "How is he?" Dr. Richards closed the book he was holding and looked at her seriously. "Do you really want to know?" She nodded, her heart racing. The doctor sighed. "He agreed to go to the clinic. He's been there for almost 2 months, undergoing intensive therapy, participating in groups, working through his traumas. It's not easy, and there are bad days, but there's also progress. Real, tangible progress." Marianne felt a mixture of relief and sadness. "I'm glad to hear that, truly. He talks about you, you know. Not often, but when he does, it's with gratitude. He says you helped him see that there was still hope, even when everything seemed lost." Tears threatened to fall, but Marianne held them back. "I only did what anyone with a shred of compassion would do." Dr. Richards shook his head. "No, you did much more than that. And he knows it, but he also understands why you had to leave. And he's using that as motivation to get truly better, to become someone who doesn't need crutches, who can stand on his own." They talked for a few more minutes, exchanged phone numbers, and the doctor promised to keep Marianne informed of Reese's progress if she wanted. She said yes, she would like to know. And when he left, she stood there in the middle of the bookshop, feeling that a piece of her heart that had been locked away had just been touched again. The weeks passed, turning into months. Marianne received occasional updates from Dr. Richards. Reese had been discharged from the clinic and was living in a smaller flat in Kendall, closer to the town centre. He had started working remotely as a consultant in the field he had worked in before his breakdown. He was attending therapy weekly. He was, slowly, rebuilding a life. The mansion had been sold, as was inevitable. Mrs. Gable had gone to live with a daughter in Devon, and Mr. Wallace had found work on another estate in this region. A chapter had closed for everyone. It was on an April afternoon, as autumn began to paint the trees in golden hues, that Marianne received a message that took her completely by surprise. It was from an unknown number. "Hi, Marianne. It's Reese. I hope you don't mind me getting your number from Dr. Richards. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to cause any discomfort. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay. Really okay, for the first time in years. And a large part of that is thanks to you. Thank you for everything. And I'm sorry for everything too. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure, no expectations, just available. Take care. Reese." Marianne read and reread that message countless times. There was a maturity there, a clarity that hadn't existed when she had known him. Reese seemed to be finally the whole version of himself, not the broken version she had found, nor the deluded version that had clung to her as salvation, but someone who had done the hard work of healing. It took her 2 days to reply. When she finally did, she kept the tone light. "Hi. Grace, it's good to know you're well, truly. I'm very happy for your progress, and you don't need to thank me. We did what we could with what we had at the time. I hope you continue to take care of yourself. And yes, we can talk whenever you like. No pressure. Marianne." The exchange of messages began sporadically. 1 message a week, then 2, then it became almost daily. They talked about simple things, books they were reading, films they had watched, small events of the day. There was a lightness to their communication that hadn't existed before, when everything was dense and laden with trauma and need. After a few weeks, Reese suggested they meet, just for a coffee on neutral ground, without the weight of the mansion and everything that had happened there. Marianne hesitated. She was afraid that seeing him in person would undo all the progress they had both made, but she was also curious. She wanted to see with her own eyes if he really was okay, if the change was as profound as it seemed in the messages. She accepted, and they arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the centre of Manchester on a Saturday morning. Marianne arrived first, chose a table near the window, and waited with her heart pounding. When she saw Reese walk in, it took her a few seconds to fully recognize him. He was different. Not physically, although he had gained some healthy weight and his eyes no longer had those deep, dark circles. But it was something in his posture, in the way he walked. There was a confidence there that hadn't existed before, a presence that was no longer marked by absence. Marianne, he said as he reached the table, a genuine smile on his face. "You look beautiful." She felt her face flush. "You look well." "Very well." They sat down, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. But then Rhys started talking, and the conversation flowed naturally. He told her about therapy, about the difficult realizations he had had about himself, about how he had learned to deal with his traumas instead of running from them. He talked about his new job, about making peace with the loss of the mansion, about building a simpler but more authentic life. Marianne shared her own journey, about how returning to Manchester had been difficult at first, about her job at the bookshop, about starting to write. And for the first time she told someone other than Julia about the book she was writing, vaguely inspired by her experiences. "It's about healing," she explained, about two broken people who meet and try to save each other, but end up realizing that salvation had to come from within. That love, no matter how strong, doesn't fix anyone. It just makes the process less lonely. Rhys was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. "It sounds like an important story. I'd like to read it when it's ready." They spent hours in that coffee shop talking about everything and nothing, and when they finally said goodbye, there was a sense of closure, but also of possibility, not of picking up where they had left off, but of perhaps eventually starting something new, something built on healthier foundations. In the following weeks they continued to meet, always in public places, always keeping the boundaries clear. They went to the cinema, walked along the canals, visited museums. And with each meeting, Marianne saw more clearly that the man beside her was no longer the same one she had left at the mansion, and she was no longer the same woman who had arrived at that place looking for a hiding place. It was on a weekend when Julia was away, leaving Marianne alone in the flat, that Rhys called with an unusual request. "I know this might sound strange, but I'd like to show you something. Would you be up for a drive with me tomorrow? It's a bit of a way, but I promise it's worth it." Marianne, curious and a little apprehensive, accepted. The next day, Rhys picked her up in his car. They took the motorway towards the Lake District, and Marianne felt her stomach tighten as she realized the direction they were heading. "Are we going to the lakes?" "Yes, but not to the mansion, if that's what you're worried about. Trust me." They drove for nearly 2 hours, talking about pleasantries until Rhys left the main road and took a secondary one. Marianne recognized some landmarks, and her heart began to beat faster. When they finally stopped, she realized where they were. It was the entrance to the estate, but everything was different. The wrought iron gate had been replaced by a simpler one. The avenue of ancient trees was still there, but now there were signs indicating that the place had become a country inn. The mansion itself was in the same spot, but clearly renovated, with new colors on the walls and reorganized gardens. Rhys noticed the confusion on her face. "After I sold it, the new owners turned it into an inn. They kept the main structure, but changed a lot. I thought you might like to see it. Somehow, it brings me peace to know the place has a new life, that it didn't just remain a monument to pain." They got out of the car and walked around the property. There were guests milling about, children playing in the garden, life and movement, where before there had only been silence and melancholy. It was surreal, and at the same time, comforting. Marianne asked to see the lake. Rhys hesitated for a moment, but then agreed. They walked together to the bank, and when they arrived, Marianne let out a muffled gasp of surprise. The willow tree was in bloom. The tree that Mrs. Gable had said was dry for years, that seemed dead and forgotten, was covered in vibrant green leaves and delicate little flowers. It was as if nature had decided it was time to be reborn. Rhys stood beside her, equally impressed. "When I came here a few weeks ago to sort out the final details of the sale, the tree was still dry. This has happened recently." Marianne touched the willow necklace at her throat, feeling the symbolic connection, healing and resilience. It was as if the tree was reflecting what had happened to them. They had bent under the weight of pain, had come close to breaking completely, but they hadn't broken. And now, finally, they were blooming again. Rhys turned to her, and there was something different in his eyes, No longer the desperate dependency of before, but something softer and deeper. Marianne, I need to tell you something, and I want you to know that I'm not saying it because I expect anything in return or because I think you owe me anything. I'm saying it simply because it's true and because you deserve to hear it. She waited, her heart racing. When you came into my life, I was so lost I couldn't see beyond my own pain. I turned you into something you weren't because I needed to believe salvation existed. But now, after all this time, after all the work I've done on myself, I've realized something. I didn't fall in love with an illusion. I fell in love with you. The real Marianne. The woman who had the courage to confront me when I needed to be confronted, who left when leaving was the hardest and most right thing to do, who carries her own scars but remains kind to the scars of others. Tears streamed down Marianne's face without her trying to stop them. Rhys continued, his voice firm but emotional. I'm not asking to go back to what we were because what we were wasn't healthy, but I am asking for a chance to start again, the right way. Two whole people, not two broken halves trying to complete each other. Two individuals who choose to be together not out of necessity, but out of genuine desire. No illusions, no projections, just real. Marianne wiped the tears from her face, trying to find the right words. Rhys, I feel something for you too. I always have, but I was so afraid it was just our unhealthy dynamic, the codependency. I was afraid that if we took away all the pain and drama, there would be nothing real left. And now? He asked, taking a step towards her. Taking away all the pain and drama, what's left? Marianne thought for a long moment. She thought about the past few months, the conversations they had had, the light and uncomplicated dates, the way her heart still raced when she saw a message from him, the ease with which they now laughed together, the way he had grown and changed and how she had too. Something real is left, she finally admitted. Someone I admire, who makes me laugh, who understands parts of me that few people do, someone I would choose to be with even if we had never been through all that. Rhys smiled, and it was a smile full of hope. So can we try? Slowly? No rush? But really try? Marianne looked at the lake, at the blossoming willow, at this place that had been the scene of so much pain, but now breathed renewal. She looked at the man before her, who was no longer the haunted ghost she had known, but someone who had fought hard to become whole again. We can try, she said, and for the first time in a long time, she felt she was making a choice based not on fear or need, but on a genuine desire to build something good. Rhys approached slowly, giving her all the time to back away if she wanted. But she didn't. When he hugged her, it was different from all the previous hugs. There was no desperation there, no unhealthy attachment, just two people who had been through hell separately and were now choosing to walk together towards something better. They stood, there embracing for a long time, listening to the sound of the wind in the willow branches, the distant murmur of the inn's guests, the singing of birds. It was a moment of pure presence, with no past haunting them, no future terrifying them. Just the now, which was more than enough. When they finally pulled apart, Marianne took the necklace from her neck and held it in her hands, looking at the willow pendant she had worn for so long. My grandmother used to say the willow represents healing and resilience, that it bends but doesn't break. Rhys gently touched the pendant. She was right, and look, he pointed to the tree behind them. Even when it seems dead, it can still bloom again. Marianne smiled, putting the necklace back on. They walked hand in hand back to the car, but before they left, she took one last look at the mansion, the lake, the blossoming willow. That place had witnessed her breaking, but also her rebirth. And now, transformed into something new, it would continue its story without them. On the way back, they talked about the future, not with definite plans or grand promises, but with the lightness of those who know the future is built one day at a time. Rhys mentioned he was thinking of moving closer to Manchester to make the therapy he was still attending easier. Marianne talked about the book she was writing, about how she was seriously considering trying to get it published. They talked about trips they wanted to take, places they wanted to see, experiences they wanted to have. When they got back to Marianne's flat, the sun was already setting, painting the sky with the same orange and pink hues she had seen so many times in the hills. Rhys walked her to the door, and there was a moment of hesitation. "Can I see you again next week?" he asked. "You can, and the week after, and the one after that. Let's build this properly, one day at a time." He smiled and leaned in to kiss her on the forehead, a soft, respectful gesture. When he left, Marianne stood at the door watching his car disappear down the street. She went into the flat and found Julia, who had just returned from her trip, sprawled on the sofa. "So, how was it?" her friend asked, curious. Marianne sat beside her, still processing everything that had happened. "It was good, really good. We're going to try again, but differently this time." Julia hugged her. "You deserve this, Marianne. You deserve something good, built the right way." That night, Marianne opened the document where she was writing her story. She had stopped a few weeks ago, not knowing how to end it, but now she knew. She knew the story wasn't about salvation. It wasn't about one person fixing another. It was about two broken souls who found each other at the right time, or perhaps the wrong time, but who used that encounter as a catalyst for their own individual healing, and who, after doing the necessary work separately, managed to find each other again as more whole versions of themselves. She began to write the final chapter, and the words flowed with an ease she hadn't felt before. She wrote about the willow that blooms after years of being dry, about how healing isn't linear, how it involves setbacks and progress, pain and hope, about how true love doesn't fix anyone, but offers a safe space for people to fix themselves. When she finished, it was already early morning, but she didn't feel tired. She felt light, as if she had put down on paper a weight she had been carrying for months. She closed her laptop and went to the window, looking out at the sleeping city below, and for the first time since she had left the mansion, she didn't feel that tightness in her chest. She didn't feel like she had left something behind, because she realized now that she hadn't left anything. She had carried it all with her, processed it, transformed it, and now she was ready to move on. The following months were a slow but solid construction. Rhys moved to Manchester, found a small but cozy flat, continued to work and attend therapy. He and Marianne saw each other regularly, but maintained their independent lives. She continued at the bookshop, continued writing, continued cultivating her friendships. He reconnected with some old friends, started exercising, developed new hobbies. They didn't live together. They weren't in a hurry to take big steps. They just enjoyed each moment, building real memories to replace the illusions of the past. They went to the cinema, cooked together in her flat, had picnics on the coast, read books side by side in comfortable silence. There were difficult days, of course, days when Rhys still struggled with anxiety, when the memories of the past weighed heavily, days when Marianne felt insecure, questioning if she was making the right choices. But on those days, instead of drowning together, they supported each other while maintaining healthy boundaries. Rhys would see his therapist, Marianne would talk to Julia or write, and then, when they were more centered, they would come back to each other not as clinging castaways but as partners choosing to walk side by side. A year after that day by the lake, when the willow had first bloomed, they returned to the estate together. The inn was doing well. The new owners had done an excellent job of maintaining the mansion's charm while transforming it into something welcoming. They walked to the lake, and the willow was still green and vibrant, its leaves dancing in the wind. Marianne touched the tree's trunk, feeling the rough texture under her fingers. "You know what's funny? We both came here broken, thinking the other would fix us, and in the end we fixed ourselves. But having you around, in a healthy way, makes everything lighter." Rhys stood beside her, watching the tree. A willow doesn't bloom on its own. It needs sun, water, fertile soil. We don't heal on our own either. We need support, love, people who believe in us. The difference is that now we understand that support isn't dependency, that loving isn't losing yourself in the other. It's choosing to be together while maintaining your own integrity. They sat on the grass, as they had done so many times in the past, but now without the weight of trauma, without the urgency of despair, Just two human beings who had walked through their own journeys of pain and healing, and who now chose to share the path. The sun began to set, painting the sky with those orange and golden hues that Marianne loved so much. Rhys pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling at peace. "Thank you," he murmured, "for not giving up on me completely, for coming back when the time was right." "Thank you for doing the work of truly healing," she replied, "for becoming someone I can build something healthy with." They stayed there until the stars began to appear in the sky, talking about dreams and plans, about fears and hopes. And when they finally stood up to leave, Marianne took one last look at the willow, the tree that had witnessed their pain, that had almost died, but had found the strength to bloom again. It was a perfect symbol for what they had lived through, and a reminder that even in the worst storms, even when all seems lost, there is still the possibility of rebirth. There is still room to bloom again. Months later, Marianne's book was accepted by a small but respected publisher. On the day of the launch, Rhys was there in the front row of the bookshop where she would do her first public reading. When she stepped up to the small makeshift stage and began to read an excerpt from the book, the words echoed through the silent space. This is a story about two broken people who found each other at a time when they needed something, anything, to make them feel less alone. It is not a love story that fixes, because love fixes no one. It is a love story that bears witness, that offers safe space, that celebrates individual growth while building something together. It is a story about willows that bend but do not break, that bloom even after they seem dead. It is a story about the courage to leave when necessary, and the even greater courage to return when the time is right. When she finished the reading, there were tears in the eyes of several people in the audience, and when her eyes met Rhys's, she saw there no longer the broken man she had known, but someone who had fought hard to become whole, and who looked at her, not with need, but with genuine, healthy love. After the event, they walked through the streets of Manchester hand in hand, talking about how special the night had been. When they reached the canals, they stopped to watch the water under the moonlight. "Have you ever thought about what it would be like if we had never met?" Marianne asked. Rhys was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I think I would have found my way somehow. It might have taken longer. It might have been harder. But I needed to do that work regardless. You didn't save me, Marianne, but you made the journey less lonely. And you gave me a reason to want to get to the other side." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "We're a strange pair, aren't we? Two people who met in the most unlikely circumstances, who went through an emotional hell, who had to separate to be able to truly find each other again. Maybe, but we're also proof that it's possible, that you can get out of rock bottom, that you can bloom again, even when everything tells you you're dead inside." They stayed there for hours, just existing in that moment of peace. And when they finally went home, each to their own space because they still maintained that healthy independence, Marianne felt a deep gratitude for everything she had lived through, for the pains that had shaped her, for the difficult choices she had made, for the man she had found and lost and found again in a healthier way. Life hadn't become perfect. There were still difficult days, challenges, uncertainties about the future. But something fundamental had changed. She was no longer running, she was building. And beside her, when she chose, was someone who had also learned to build instead of just survive. And maybe that was the true story of healing. Not an instant happy ending, not a magic solution, but the slow, deliberate construction of a life worth living. A life where the scars didn't disappear, but they stopped hurting. Where the past wasn't forgotten, but it also no longer dictated the present. Where two willows that had bent almost to breaking now bloomed side by side, their roots deep, their branches reaching for the sky.